The pilot of The Walking Dead is undeniably one of the most iconic pilots in all of television. What makes it so iconic is not only its scope, but also how different it feels to other TV show pilots, as through most of it we're only with our elite Rick Grimes. It set the tone of the series and kickstarted what is now an almost 15-year franchise. Whether you've watched it once or like me have watched it way too many times, here are some facts about the pilot of The Walking Dead days gone by you didn't know. After Rick Grimes gets shot and wakes up in the hospital, he rocks a pretty substantial beard. Well, that beard was actually fake. Even though as we later see in the show, Andrew Lincoln can grow an amazing beard, but there just wasn't enough time for him to grow it out, so they had to use a fake one. There was a clock frozen at 2:17 during the hospital scene, which is the same time seen on a clock when the explosion saw her from the same room in TS-19. That's also a reference to room 217 from The Shining. Stephen King and Frank Darabont are friends in real life, and Darabont has done numerous adaptations from his books. And yeah, King County itself is another Stephen King reference. When Rick lights the match in a dark stairwell, this flame is actually not real. He's holding a tiny bulb in his hand, and the fire effect was added later with CGI. Originally, Rick was supposed to see a pile of bodies at the bottom of the hospital stairwell. They change it so the first time he sees them is actually outside, making it in my opinion much more impactful. The Don't Dead open inside scene was filmed partly on a set and partly the real location, and then they combined it both in post. The bodies outside the hospital, 60 to 80 of them were real builds by Greg Nicotero's team. The rest were CGI, and some of the fake bodies had actually been used in other movies and shows. So that's one of the reasons that so many of the bodies were covered up, so that they can hide the reuse. Because many of them were actually like celebrities, so yeah, if they used it, it would have been kinda funny, but of course they can't, so yeah. Rick's awakening in the hospital is very similar to the opening of 28 Days Later, a British horror film released in November of 2002. Nearly 2 years prior to issue 1 of the comic book's publication and 8 years before the TV adaptation. The police car scene with Rick and Shane wasn't shot on location, it was actually done on a soundstage, and the background is just 2 giant still images pasted up like wallpapers behind them. The reason for this was that they couldn't get good audio for the whole 5-page dialogue scene, so they decided to do it on a stage. The first action scene in the pilot takes inspiration from 70s action films. Darabont wanted something that felt old school and raw. The opening of the show is a direct nod to Night of the Living Dead. Frank Darabont wanted to honor the original zombie classic, so he decided to start it off in the same way. The abandoned UH-1 Huey helicopter is marked with the insignia of the 7th Squadron 1st Air Cavalry Regiment, which was deactivated in 1976. A few walkers seen in this episode seem to be more mentally adept than the walkers that are seen in later seasons. In season 11 this was basically retconned as them being variant walkers that retain a greater intelligence than the vast majority of zombies. Which, by the way, really sucked, since they did that and then had no variants at all show up in any of the spin-offs. Classic The Walking Dead. Andrew Lincoln actually got his driver's license not long before starting The Walking Dead. And also, as you may know, he's British, so he learned to drive on the left side of the road. And so going into America, with a new driver's license acquired in the UK, he was driving pretty rough, so John Bernthal sitting next to him was genuinely scared. The Georgia heat had the cast constantly dripping sweat, so the MC executives had originally demanded extra makeup, but once they actually visited the set themselves, they changed their mind. Extras casting was intense. Producers held a 3-day audition specifically for tall, thin people to play zombies. Accepted extras were sent to zombie school with Greg Nicotero to perfect their zombie walk. This walker here is actually played by the same girl who played the bicycle girl walker. Inside the tank, that zombie is played by Sam Witwer. He also plays the lead in the video game Days Gone. Sam Witwer and Frank Darabont are friends in real life, and there was a full episode in season 2 planned around his character, where we would see how the military and Atlanta fell and how he got trapped in the tank, but all of this was scrapped when Darabont left the show. Andrew Lincoln was actually the last actor to audition for Rick Grimes. He auditioned via tape for one scene, then Darabont flew him over to America, and him and John Bernthal both read in his garage, and then and there they knew immediately that it was going to work. Andrew's father-in-law, Ian Anderson from Jethro Tull, actually visited the set during the filming of the cold open, when Rick shoots a zombified little girl. John Bernthal actually also auditioned as Rick Grimes, but he was so good at Shane that there was just no question about it. Morgan's house interior was actually a reused set from the show Detroit 187. They just modified it to look like the real location. And the real house that was used for the outside shots, it belonged to a woman who worked at the actual real-life CDC. This hallway in the police station is actually part of the show's production offices. Same goes for the weapons room, just a different floor of the same building. Even the exterior of the police station is across the street from their studios. The scene with Morgan where he tries to put out his zombified wife out of her misery is the only time Morgan's house wasn't filmed on a set, but on the actual house location. Rick is supposedly going south on I-85 going into Atlanta, but that is not the skyline of Atlanta you would see if we were heading south. The skyline is from Freedom Parkway facing west. Rick's home in fictional King County, Georgia is actually a house located directly across the street from Zoo Atlanta. In fact, when Rick exits the house, you can just see one of the zoo buildings through the trees on the other side of the street. The first filming day was the shootout. They had just 14 days to shoot the whole pilot, which is 90 minutes long. And because of the nature of the show, a ton of stuff had to be CGI. So the studio who were in charge of the visual effects, Stargate, had to do 120 digital shots in just a little less than a month. Pretty impressive. The way the pilot was originally put together was also totally different. What we now know was the first and the second episode were actually one big episode of the first. It was much faster paced, more action heavy, resembling a full-on movie, which makes sense considering this was the first TV show Frank Darabont worked on, and he was a pretty notorious movie director. But later in post-production, Darabont actually ended up splitting the script into 2 episodes, which gave us the first 2 episodes that we now know as Days Gone By and Guts. The reason for this split is that he wanted to focus on the characters and give the story more time to settle in, instead of rushing through it. Which in the end I think worked out better, since the first 2 episodes are pretty amazing. When Rick sees Shane in the hospital, that weird disoriented effect is actually based on the Road Warrior. Rick's horse ride into Atlanta had a big problem. They did a few takes with Andy riding the amazing stunt horse Blade, but in the best take his hat flew off, so they had to put it back in digitally. Talking about the visual effects, the lightning flashes in the broken windshield in this car scene here, all CGI. In the scene where Rick walks to the military base, pretty much everything you see is actually CGI, except for this building and the helicopter body. The police strip where the car flips over, also CGI. The iconic white shot of Rick riding down the highway into Atlanta is actually 90% CGI. Pretty amazing for 2010. The final shot of the pilot where the camera rises up from the tank also got heavy CGI work. At the roadblock, Rick advises Leon to check that the safety is off on his gun. However, the gun is a Glock 17, which has no true manual safeties. The only external safety is the trigger safety, that is automatically disengaged when a finger squeezes the trigger. Instead, Leon appears to press the slide release, which does nothing because the slide is already forward. In addition, we can see that the gun is unloaded when he checks the chamber. When they showed the gas station scene, people driving by actually thought something real had happened. Cars were stopping, people were yelling out, asking if there had been an accident. And that scene at the gas station originally had 2 walkers hiding in abandoned cars who were supposed to chase Rick as he refueled. The Sherman tank Rick shelters in is actually a British chieftain, modified to resemble an Abrams, because the Abrams has no bottom hatch. When Rick first sees the horde in Atlanta and the horse goes on his back legs in fright, to the back left of the screen a walker can be seen sipping from a water bottle. Of course, that's some guy from the production offices who was just a bit thirsty. Yeah. In that same scene actually, we were almost gonna see Robert Kirkman as well, but in the last second he actually moved in one of the buildings to the side so you can't see him. But as he mentions in the commentary, he was almost seen and even yelled at after the take ended. And that's it for The Walking Dead's pilot. The Walking Dead's pilot wasn't just a great first episode, it showed what was possible on television, especially at that time. And looking back, it's incredible how much much thought, detail and behind the scenes magic went into those first 90 minutes. The 90 minutes from which a whole franchise of TV shows and even video games were born. But yeah, thank you for watching, and if you want more deep dives like this, make sure to like and subscribe, and I will see ya in the next one.